Well, finally, a Bleach episode worth breaking down. It's about damn time. Bleach has been rather underwhelming from a visual point of view so far. Maybe it's because of all the other shows airing this season, the likes of Chainsaw Man and Mob Psycho. Maybe my expectations are way too high, but I can't help but laugh when I see a Bleach fan claim that this new 1000-year Blood War arc has quote movie level animation. When's the last time you saw an anime movie where 2/3 of the scenes were still frames? Bleach has been heavily relying on limited animation up until this point, with the effects animation and the compositing carrying the visual department. If you don't know what limited animation is, it's an approach that involves reusing frames instead of separately animating them. So those still frames with looped effects, hair and fabric movements can be considered limited animation. Also, a whole sequence can be looped at times. Well, thankfully this episode is different. It's actually really well animated. Let's break it down. This episode of course is directed by Hiroyuki Yamashita, and long story short, he directed this, and that speaks for itself. As always, let's start with the storyboards. Bleach hasn't exactly been a cinematic spectacle so far, but all that changed with this episode. It's not just the animation, the storyboards were top notch. The cuts between the past and the present made the flashbacks feel like they were part of the actual narrative, quite similar to the Kakashi vs Obito fight. Also, I know that this is a visual breakdown, but the sound design was amazing. The slightly distorted audio that gets across the intense heat, as well as the drowning out of the audio during the flashbacks. It was perfect. Let's also mention the action choreography. Of course, Bleach has a different approach towards action, relying more on the explosive style. Naturally, it won't have that Naruto-esque hand-to-hand combat. Instead, this fight allowed the effects animation to run wild. We'll talk more about that in a bit. The choreography was solid for what it was supposed to be. It moved fast, it flowed really well, and it was really fun to look at. As for the animation, oh boy, this was one of the best animated episodes this season, and considering the other shows airing, that's a big deal. Of course, the general effects animation was out of this world, almost Fire Force tier. We'll talk more about that as we continue. The first major cut was animated by Saucelot, is that how you say it? And it was actual insanity. It was the perfect modern style of action animation. The sequence starts off with some wild fabric animation and a ton of lifelike movements. This cut gives you the illusion of background animation thanks to these shifting lines on the ground. The camera moves fast, with characters being tiny in one frame and huge in another. A lot of movement can be seen throughout this sequence. Even when Yamamoto already finished landing his attack, he was still always moving. This was an interesting phase. Those teeth are huge. Some amazing effects animation can be seen, as well as some top-notch camera work, as Yamamoto launches the burning tiles at his opponent. The effects here have a liquid look, which works as the things would probably melt at that temperature. You could also see some amazing flares and impact frames up until this point. There's a gorgeous rotation shot followed by more amazing effects and impact frames. This entire sequence was insanely good. Throughout this whole thing, the characters were often drawn in some interesting ways which worked in motion. The next segment is where the compositing really shines. The subtle heat waves, the muted look, it all gets across a very dry feel that the world now has. Yamamoto leaves a trail of fire as he rushes his enemy. The cuts that follow are animated by Yugen? Some amazing effects and impact frames, followed by another modern looking cut as rocks are thrown towards Yamamoto. The effects here look liquid as the rocks obviously melted. The characters really stretch a lot in this sequence, and you can find some aggressive smears. I really like this effect that can be seen when Yamamoto's sword makes contact with anything. There are some really good looking impact frames and effects whenever that happens. The effects animation steps up a notch by this point, and this is a good time to talk about the effects, which mainly includes fire and liquid, the liquid being stuff melted by the fire. Most of the effects in this episode are hand-drawn. Of course, there are some digital effects as well, but the majority is 2D, which is really impressive. The fire takes on different looks depending on the animator, but it always looks really good. More fast-paced action follows, and then we get to the part that will piss some people off. I genuinely hope that people don't complain about the CGI here, but unfortunately they will. The use of CGI here was really good. I will go on record and say that this scene wouldn't look half as good if it was hand-drawn. Oh, but the CGI looks uncanny. Yamamoto just raised the dead from the ground, Einstein. It's supposed to look uncanny. I love how the atmosphere changes during these scenes. There's some brilliant camera work that can be seen as well. I won't talk about the CGI for too long, just know that this looked perfect. The next sequence was animated by Kyukawa, and if you don't know who that is, he is an amazing animator responsible for multiple cuts of action from Mushoku Tensei, as well as this sequence from Attack on Titan Season 4 Part 2. He's very good. As for his work here, I don't even have the words. It's some of the best effects animation that I've ever seen. The paintbrush-like strokes, the black lines, it's as if this entire sequence is impact frames. Is it? Does it count? Of course, there are actual impact frames here as well. This whole sequence relied more on effects than actual character movement. Pretty much most of Yamamoto's body was covered by flames. This is unlike Yukawa's normal stuff, but this might be his best work yet. I know that I've used this word a few times so far, but this was pure insanity. And that marks the end of the action. I won't break down the rest of the episode in terms of animation, there's not much to talk about there either. Let's talk about the compositing instead. From the very first episode, the compositing has been quite good for this show. The compositing, the art direction, and the effects were three departments that visibly improved from the previous iteration of this series. And this episode was no different. I already talked about the heat waves, but the lighting in general looked really good. So did the background movements. If I had to nitpick, I'd say that the digital effects didn't always look the best, but that's truly all I can hate on. This episode looked phenomenal. It's a shame that not every episode will look this good. It's not realistically possible for a near 50 episode series, but if we get an episode like this every once in a while, sign me up. And that just about does it. As you know, I'm not making breakdowns for Chainsaw Man at the moment. I will get back to those around episode 8. Until then, I may make one of these breakdowns either for Bleach or for Mob or even for My Hero Academia. It really depends on how those shows look. There's also something that I need to mention. As you may have noticed, we crossed 1,000 subscribers, which is absolutely insane. I really cannot thank you enough, each and every single one of you. I haven't been doing this for that long, but the support has been nuts. We are also closing in on 100,000 overall views on this channel. Again, a massive thanks to all of you, and until next time.